In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to solve rational equations. So now you're going to notice that you have a fraction, but you're going to have equal signs in there. Okay, before we never had any equal signs, but now we do. So there's two types of problems. There's going to be one type where you only have two fractions with an equal sign in between them, which are like our first two. And then you're going to have the last examples, which have three fractions in them. So with two fractions, then you get to use what we call cross multiply. So I would start off by taking 3 times 4x plus 5, and then set it equal to cross multiply the other way, which is 9 times x plus 1. So that will give me 12x plus 15 equals 9x plus 9. And now you just move things around and solve for 9. So I'm just going to start by, solve for x, not solve for 9. I'm going to start by subtracting 9x over. So 3x plus 15 equals 9. And then I'm going to subtract the 15. So I get 3x equals negative 6. And if I divide, I get x to equal negative 2. Now, the one new thing you have to do before you call this done is step number 5 right here. It says you must check your answers because there could be extraneous solutions, which means there could be solutions that don't count. So remember in the past when we were doing this without an equal sign, we'd come up with a fraction answer and then we'd say, oh, it's good except for x could not equal this number or this number. That's kind of what we're doing here. So if I look at my original fractions, okay, so on the first one, if I check that, I would do x plus 1 equals 0. So x would equal negative 1. So x cannot be negative 1, which I'm okay because I'm saying x is negative 2. So far we're okay. Let's check the other fraction. 4x plus 5 equals 0. So 4x equals negative 5, divide, and I would say x cannot equal negative 5/4. Neither one of those are the answer I came up with, so then I'm going to say yes, my answer checks out. So negative 2 is it. Okay, so then let's go over to the next one. Once again, start by cross multiplying because there's only two fractions. So 5 times x squared minus 1 equals 15 times 2x minus 2. So 5x squared minus 5 equals 30x minus 30. Now, because I have an x squared, I want everything on the same side with x squared. So I'm going to move this one over and this one over. So I get 5x squared minus 30x. And when I move the minus 30 over, it becomes plus 30, and negative 5 plus 30 is positive 25. Now, I can factor or I can do the quadratic formula, but I do notice, hey, all of these numbers are divisible by 5. So I'm going to do a GCF and take out 5, which will give me x squared minus 6x plus 5. And then since these numbers are super small, I'm going to go ahead and do factoring, and especially now that I have a 1 in front of x squared, so I can do my fast factoring. So what multiplies for 5 and adds for negative 6? So hopefully everybody's going to say, oh, x minus 5, x minus 1. And then when I solve, I get x minus 5 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0, so x equals 5, and x equals 1. So now before I call this done, remember we have to go back up here and figure out what the answers cannot be. So on the first fraction, 2x minus 2 equals 0, so 2x equals 2, x equals 1, so x cannot equal 1. Oh, well, look right here. I'm saying x equals 1. So that one right here, this one fails. So that is not an answer. And then if I do the other one, x squared minus 1 equals 0. So x squared equals 1. Square root both sides. When you take the square root, you have plus or minus, and the square root of 1 is 1. So x cannot equal positive 1 or negative 1. So in our case, the only one that works is positive 5. Now, not all the problems are only going to have 2 fractions. A lot of them are going to have 3 fractions. So now we're going to move into the second type. And the second type, to start this one, you want to find the LCD. So the least common denominator between all of your fractions. So on C, there's no plus or minuses in the denominator, so I can piece this out. So I've got 2, 5, and 2. Well, 2, 5, and 2 all go into 10. And then remember, you go with the highest exponent, and the highest exponent is just x to the first. So my least common denominator is 10x. Now, what I'm going to end up doing is taking each fraction times the LCD. So I'm just going to write that out. I'm writing each fraction, and next to each fraction, I'm going to put times whatever my LCD is. All right, great. My first one. Well, in the denominator, I have 2, and 2 will go into 10 5 times. And then the x's cross off. So I have 1 times 5, which is 5. On my middle fraction, 5 goes into 10 2 times. And each of my x's cross off. So I have negative 2 times 2, which is negative 4. And on my last one, 2 goes into 10 5 times. So I have 1 times 5x, which is 5x. 5 minus 4 is 1. 1 equals 5x. Divide, and I get x to equal 1/5. So now let's check it out. Okay. So if I said 2x equals 0, then if I divide, I would get x to equal 0. So x cannot be 0. And 5x equals 0, divide, and x cannot equal 0. The last fraction only has 2 in the denominator. There's no variable. So really the only answer it cannot be is 0. So our 1/5 is safe. Now, what happens when you have 3 fractions, but you start having a plus and a minus in the denominators? Well, that's when you kind of have to go back to what we were doing in the last lesson. And I need you to factor or GCF the denominators. So on my first fraction, 3x minus 12, I can do a GCF. So take a 3 out, and I get 3 parentheses x minus 4. So least common denominator. Okay, I have to have my outside 3's. They're shared, so remember, only write it down one time. And then x minus 4 and x minus 4 is shared, so only write that down one time. So my least common denominator is 3 parentheses x minus 4. So on my first fraction, when I take that times my LCD, hopefully everybody's going to say, oh, 3's cancel out, x minus 4's cancel out, so it's just 7. Because that fraction doesn't need anything from the LCD. It's exactly that. Now you can keep writing that process out where you take each fraction times the LCD. Or if you want to start doing that mentally in your head, you can. So here, my middle fraction, it has x minus 4, check. The only thing it doesn't have is 3. So I'm going to take this negative 1 times 3 and make it negative 3. My last fraction here, it has the outside 3 check. It does not have the x minus 4. So then I'm going to take the 2 times x minus 4. So distribute that, and I get 2x minus 8. 7 minus 3 is 4. Then I'm going to add the 8 over. So if I add the 8 over, I get 12 equals 2x. Divide, and x equals 2. So now let's just go check, figure out what x could not be, and see if we're okay. So my first fraction, 3x minus 12 equals 0. So 3x equals 12. Divide, and x cannot equal 4, but we're safe because we're saying 6 so far, so check. And then x minus 4 equals 0. So move that over, and you're saying x cannot equal positive 4. And the last fraction doesn't have any variables, so we don't have to worry about that. So the only thing that it cannot be is 4. So our answer of 6 is completely fine. So now let's go to the last example. On the last example, I can't do anything with x minus 4 on the bottom of the first fraction. Whoops, sorry, my screen turned. Let me flip that back for you. Middle fraction, I can't do anything with x plus 4. But hey, this last denominator, I can factor that. And we could do fast factoring because it starts with a 1. So what multiplies for negative 16 that adds for 0? And hopefully everybody says x minus 4 and x plus 4. So now LCD. Well, 2 fractions have x minus 4, so write it down one time. And 2 other fractions have x plus 4, so write that down one time. So your LCD is 2 parentheses, x minus 4 and x plus 4. The first fraction, it has x minus 4, check. So the only thing it needs from the LCD is x plus 4. My middle fraction, it has x plus 4. The only thing it needs is x minus 4. And my last fraction has both of them, so it needs nothing, so the top just stays as 15. So now I'm going to distribute. I'm going to get x squared plus 4x plus 2x squared minus 8x equals 15. So combine like terms, and that's going to give me 3x squared minus 4x equals 15. And I have to move all terms to where the x squared is. So move the 15 over. So 3x squared minus 4x minus 15 equals 0. Now here you can factor or do the quadratic formula. This one you would have to do the longer way of factoring because it has a number besides 1 in front of x squared. So for me, I'm just going to go ahead and say, well, if I can't do fast factoring, I'm going to do the quadratic formula. So opposite of b would be positive 4 plus or minus square root of regular b, which is negative 4 squared. Make sure you put that in parentheses on your calculator. I'll give you the wrong answer. Minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is negative 15, all over 2a, which would be 2 times 3. So if I type the part in underneath the square roots, that should give you 196. And on the bottom, 2 times 3 is 6. Then I take the square root of 196, which the square root of 196 is a perfect square, and that is 14. Then I'm going to split my plus or minus to come up with my 2 separate answers. So that will give me 18 over 6, which 18 over 6 is 3. And the bottom one will give me negative 10 over 6, which reduces to negative 5/3. So now let's check. Okay, so if I go back to my denominators, x minus 4 equals 0. So x cannot equal positive 4, which we're okay because we don't have that as an answer choice. And then x plus 4 equals 0. So x equals negative 4. So it can't be negative 4, which isn't one of my choices either. And then the third denominator breaks down to the first two denominators. So we are actually good. Both of our answers check out. And we're done.